Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery, Season 1, Episode 1, The Vulcan Hello, and Season 1, Episode 2, Battle at Binary Stars. This video is first in a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with the spoiler warning for Star Trek Discovery, Season 1, Episode 1, and Episode 2. If you haven't seen up to the end of Episode 2, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, ever since the end of Enterprise, I've been waiting for Star Trek to return to TV, because growing up as far back as I can remember, there's always been the Star Trek show on TV. I mean, I guess when I was 8, The Next Generation first came on, and I didn't even start watching Star Trek until I was 12, but my main point is, for most of my life, I had a Trek TV show, sometimes even multiple shows on to turn to. But since 2005, when Enterprise was canceled, I had nothing. I've been dying for more Star Trek. Now, in the gap, we did have those J.J. Abrams reboot films, which I personally do not consider Star Trek. I was excited for them at first, but then quickly realized that they were just mindless blockbuster fodder used that just used the name of Star Trek to attract more audiences. Plus, movies were never really Star Trek's thing. I did enjoy 4 out of the 6 original Star Trek films, but Trek has always been a franchise about TV. So when I got the news Star Trek was returning as a TV show, I was over the moon. Of course, I did have some fears after being burned by the reboots, but a TV show was always what Trek was meant to be. So I was reassured that care would be given to stay true to Star Trek canon, and more importantly, to have Star Trek themes. To be honest, I would have been open to a show that took place in the Kelvin universe, that is the fake parallel universe of the cover band films, but thankfully it was announced this series would indeed take place in the Prime universe, that is the actual Star Trek universe. Now, there are a lot of controversies surrounding the production of the show, as it kept getting delayed, and the original showrunner, Brian Fuller, who was noted as a huge Star Trek fan, who in fact worked on Deep Space Nine and Voyager, was the most noted as the showrunner of a critically acclaimed show, Hannibal. So when he left, rumors started flying about that the studio was driving the show into the ground, and other production issues raised a lot of concerns, and that does make some sense. However, there was this subculture of like Chicken Littles who were taking any piece of news from Discovery production and exaggerating it and screaming like the sky is falling, constantly flailing on about how the showrunners lied and isn't taking place in the Prime universe, and that the show is going to be a huge disaster, and basically railing against it as a failure before it was even released. And honestly, when judging what they were saying against what people actually involved with the show were saying, I could tell that they were exaggerating and jumping to a lot of false conclusions. And frankly, this irritated me a little bit, because I've been waiting for Star Trek to return to TV for 12 years, and now that it finally has, I want the show to succeed, even if I don't like it, because I want to see the Star Trek franchise revised and its rightful format on TV. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to love the show no matter what. If you're familiar with my channel, you may know I have no problem with speaking my mind. If there's something I think sucks, I'm going to say it sucks, no matter how much it pains me to do so. And so I'm not going to lie to myself and say Discovery is going to be great no matter what. As far as I know, all these doomsayers were completely right, and their fears were completely justified, and it's going to come out as an absolute mess. I'm just against prejudging the show before even seeing it. After all, when Star Trek The Next Generation first came out, there was likewise a huge movement of Star Trek fans who hated the whole idea of it, and they were stating that it isn't Star Trek, and there were even protests of people wanting it never to be made, and once it aired, they wanted it to be canceled, which continued out through its first 2 seasons, whereas now The Next Generation is looked on as a Star Trek masterpiece, just as beloved, if not more so, than the original series. So I just think in general, it's just not a good thing to jump to conclusions. I often talk about in my other videos about how critics can get wind of production issues, reshoots, and delays, and let that information warp their view of a movie or show and prejudge it rather than judging the film or the show on its own merits, and that's always annoyed me as well. But granted, stuff like having the diehard Star Trek fan who insisted the show would be true to Star Trek drop out as showrunner, and having multiple delays and pushbacks to air dates, and refusing to show the pilot episode to critics beforehand, they're all not good signs. So I can't really blame anyone for being worried. I was a bit worried too. I'm just against prejudging. As for me, even though there was a lot coming out that didn't look good, there was a lot coming out that did look good, such as the concept of the show was created by someone who understood Trek and wanted it to take a more modern serialized form, which is something I always wanted Star Trek to do, and it had someone in the writing room whose job it was to ensure everything stayed true to Star Trek canon, and it had a good cast of great actors. Special effects looked amazing, and they would have a shorter, more concise season to spend more time on quality, and these are all good signs as well. Now, one of the biggest notes that these Chicken Little doomsday sayers were going on about was the fact that it was revealed that the main character in the show, Michael Burnham, was raised by Spock's father, Sarek, as his ward. Many citing this fact and to state that the show doesn't take place in the prime timeline, in some weird alternate universe, parallel timeline, whatever. Now, am I excited about this? Do I think this is good writing? No, I don't think it's consistent with what's been established, and it's a cheap attempt to appeal to Trek fans when really they should just have invented another Vulcan character to fill this role as Michael Burnham's adopted father. But does it mean it's not in a prime timeline? No. This is what I mean by exaggerating, because Star Trek, and in fact many other TV shows, has always done this thing about introducing new storylines that were meant to occur in the past that don't necessarily contradict what's been established, but they make it hard to believe that this actually had occurred and was absolutely never mentioned before. Most notably in Trek, this was done when it was revealed that Spock had a half-brother named Sybok, who was never mentioned before. So this is nothing new to Trek, and although it may not be good writing necessarily, it's not a sign that the show doesn't take place in the prime timeline, which everyone involved with the show has insisted over and over and over again that it did. Now, if you want me to speak about the common complaint of this airing on CBS All Access, I won't, because I live in New Zealand and I get Discovery on Netflix, so this doesn't affect me. But just so you know, I have a hard time gathering any sympathy for those complaining about paying $6 a month for a streaming service just to watch Discovery, when I pay $20 a month for a streaming service called Neon just to watch Game of Thrones. And in addition, I pay $15 a month for Netflix and $12 a month for a service called Lightbox, which has shows I like Better Call Saul, Mr. Robot, Vikings, and Black Sails. So I have a bit of a hard time gathering sympathy for those complaining about paying $6 a month, but that's just me. Anyway, enough preamble. Let me finally get to what I thought of Discovery once I saw it. Now, I've already seen a couple reviews, some claiming it was just as bad as they feared and was an utter disaster, but others, and possibly more reviews, that say their fears were completely unwarranted, as these two first episodes were amazing and showed that the show's going to be completely awesome. So, which side do I take? Well, neither, as my feelings in this episode fall somewhere between those two extremes, but probably closer to the side that thinks it's awesome. But I'm not quite there. As I would say, I overall enjoyed the premiere. I didn't think it was the best thing ever. I had some issues with it, but mostly just thought it was okay. In fact, the way I look at Discovery is it shows promise. And I'm willing to give it a shot and stick with it in the hopes that it gets better. After all, both The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine's first two seasons weren't that great, and in fact were pretty poor, but both shows went on to become amazing. And with Discovery, I think it's possible it could get much better even later in this season. As unlike Star Trek Enterprise, whose premiere episode I thought was way worse than this one, by the way, that even when that show got better in its third and fourth seasons, it was still held back by its flat cast of characters and boring premise, whereas the premise of Discovery is much more interesting and the cast of characters are way more interesting, so it has a lot more potential. So before I get into the episodes themselves, let me talk a bit about the opening credit sequence, as I've heard some complain about this already, but I'll be honest here. When I was watching this thing the whole entire time, like right before the opening sequence came out, I was really dreading, absolutely dreading that it would follow the same line as Enterprise and use a pop song in the opening credits. I was so dreading hearing "It's been a long time" or the equivalent somewhat irrationally, really, I was just cringing. When the opening credits, I was actually expecting to hear that "It's been a long time." So when that didn't happen and nothing anywhere close to that happened, I felt completely relieved. I didn't care about anything else in the opening credits. As far as I'm concerned, the opening credits were a billion times better than the Enterprise blunder, which, by the way, is the worst offense in Star Trek history, is the biggest insult that Star Trek has ever given to the fans. So this opening credits looks brilliant to me, and any complaints anyone has about this seems to pale in comparison. But getting to the actual episodes, let me start with the characters. As I've heard some complaint about the main character, Michael Burnham, and that the acting of Sonequa Martin Green, and I completely disagree with such sentiments. In fact, I would say it's definitely one of the show's high points. Because I actually think Sonequa Martin Green did an amazing job in this role, particularly playing a human that was raised by Vulcans, and thus someone who was mostly human but had a Vulcan side to her. And I love the character as well, and I think it was definitely the high point of the show, and is why the show shows so much promise. It's great to see a human who was raised by Vulcans, and I thought these two episodes did an amazing job at fleshing out her character. Although, again, the Vulcan that raised her should have been a new character and not Sarek, but whatever. But regardless, I love the uses of flashbacks and how it did explain a lot more of her outlook. I particularly like the flashback when Burnham first came on board the Shenzhou and was acting even more of a stuck-up Vulcan than Sarek was. So one could see the vast differences between that and her behavior in present times, where she learned to become more human, but still had a Vulcan side to her. And as I said, I thought Martin Green played this amazingly well. I also totally bought her arc with Captain Giorgio, who had that of, the role of her mentor, but I totally bought that she'd be willing to betray her because she thought it was what needed to be done to save the ship. In fact, they explained this really well in the episode itself, that it was her Vulcan side mixed with her emotional side that led her to this conclusion. And I love the conflict that this created between the two of them. I thought it played out extremely well. And again, some people have been complaining that it's un-Star Trek-like to have a first officer turn on her captain, but I could rattle off a list of like a billion episodes, Chain of Command, all these episodes where it happens. So it happens in Pegasus is another one. Yeah, I could go on. Equinox. Yeah, I could go on and on. There's tons of examples of this. So this is not out of character for Star Trek at all. However, I wasn't as impressed with Captain Giorgio. Now, I realize she's played by Michelle Yeoh, a well-known actor who's appeared in films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sunshine, and Tomorrow Never Dies. So I'm not saying that she's a bad actor, but I wasn't feeling her acting here. I don't know if she just wasn't putting in the effort, or if the director did a bad job, or if this just wasn't just the right role for her. Whatever it was, I just wasn't feeling her performance, and at times it made it hard for me to buy the relationship between her and Byrne. And at times this could have been poorly written dialogue. But whatever it was, I just didn't really buy her character. Now, those were the only two real characters of consequence, but there was also Lieutenant Saru, which sounds like Sulu, but anyway, that alien-looking dude, and I thought he came off quite nicely as well. I thought the exposition he gave about his species being more of like a prey species like cows made sense and made this alien a lot more interesting, and it was delivered in a way that felt natural and not at all forced. Also, I totally bought his heated relationship with Commander Byrne, and I really liked the warning he gave about how he could sense death coming. I thought that was effectively chilling. But other than that, we had the Klingons, and I really loved how they opened the episode with them, and really the whole series with them. And it was great that they had their own little storyline that was separate from the Starfleet characters. And I loved these scenes. I felt they really fleshed out these characters and their motivations. I also loved how these scenes all took place with the characters speaking Klingon rather than English. It helped make them feel more alien, and these scenes felt like I was watching an alien culture. Well, at the same time, they did feel like Klingons, and they had the same sort of sense of Klingons. And I particularly love the overarching story of the 24 houses and how this one upstart Klingon wants to get in the history books by being the one who's able to reunite them all by starting a conflict with the Federation, and how he uses a sense of like xenophobia to stoke the fears the other Klingons have in order to gain power. I thought this worked extremely well in the context of the Klingons while making commentary on contemporary issues. And not just that, just overall you got to sense these characters as being really complex, and you can even identify and relate to them to a certain extent, which always makes for the best villains. But that being said, I'm sorry, but I still could not get over their makeup and how they look like the reboot Klingons. They look like monsters. I suppose in some sense they look more like aliens and just like a human with a weird makeup on his forehead. But it's hard for me to take them seriously when they talk about Kahless and Kronos and the High Council, because these aren't Klingons. They're just these scary looking monster things. I expect them more to go roar. I can't imagine like Worf being one of these guys. I can't imagine them breaking out into songs being like, do Kahless, do roar. I just expect them to pop out of underneath a child's bed and go roar. But I don't know. Maybe I'll get used to them looking this way. But I do think there could have been a better way to do this makeup. I understand they wanted to be less cheesy like the 90s versions, which would look a bit cheesy, modernized. But they could have done it in a way where they don't look like outright monsters, but whatever. That being said, I didn't really mind that the sets and ships look more like the reboot series, because it has to be more modernized to not look cheesy. So I'm perfectly fine with that. I heard some people complaining the ships looked more like Next Generation era ships than the original series ships. But not only do I not agree, I also don't care. I think they look fine, and I don't care even if they do look like Next Generation ships. In fact, the technology of the ships does seem, in some cases, even more advanced than the Next Generation era, but I'm fine with that too, even if it breaks canon. For example, I noted that the hologram technology they used to communicate with Sarek and the Admiral and the other ship is in canon. Specifically, this technology won't be invented for another 100 years. As in the Deep Space Nine episode For the Uniform, it introduced this technology, and specifically as new technology that has not been used before, and subsequently it had never been used again, but whatever. But I'm okay with these little breaks in canon like that, as long as it makes the show feel more realistic and better. I mean, in the scene where Commander Byrne was shooting out of her like cell in the brig when the ship had splintered in half, she was talking to the computer. The computer was behaving a lot more complex, even for Next Generation times, but it enhanced the scene and it actually made it feel more futuristic. So I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, would you rather the computer be like the original series computer and start going, working, time to arrival in 5 minutes? I mean, even modern computers sound better than that. So I don't mind them updating the look or the function of things if it helps it feel more futuristic and more realistic. But speaking of the look, I think everyone agrees, even those who didn't like these episodes, that the special effects and cinematography in this episode were simply amazing. This is by a million miles the best visuals of any Star Trek TV series. This is truly a cinematic feel. I mean, the whole asteroid sequence with Byrne flying in space was simply amazing, as was the scene where Byrne was in the brig and it was half destroyed and she had to like shoot out of the room, across the hole in the ship. I mean, that whole sequence wasn't simply amazing looking, but it was really intense and suspenseful as well, and definitely the kind of thing that we've never seen in a Star Trek TV show before. The ship battle sequence with the Klingons, though, I wasn't quite as impressed. Don't get me wrong, parts of it looked amazing, but other parts kind of overwhelmed the senses and had that sort of same feel of the reboot films that I absolutely hate, where it's just overwhelmed explosions, you get no sense of geography. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't as bad as the reboot films, but it was borderline. It was kind of approaching that. But overall, the look of the show was simply amazing, and part of that is that they're throwing so much money into it. Apparently, it's one of the most expensive shows currently airing, which does actually have me a bit concerned, quite frankly, because if it doesn't do so well as they anticipate and the ratings, then that increases the chances of it getting canceled. So I hope it gets the high ratings that they're looking for. And judging by the reaction I've seen so far, I do think that's likely, because a lot of people like me have been waiting for Trek to return to TV, but we'll see. However, something I didn't like was the opening scene with Burnham and Georgiou in the desert. This really didn't work for me. I think the dialogue here wasn't that great, and overall, the point of the mission seemed kind of a waste of time. I know what they were trying to do with this scene. It was trying to be like the opening sequence in Into Darkness, which, for the record, I think worked way better than this scene did. I think this failed to do what it was trying to do, and it felt kind of pointless. I particularly thought the scene with them creating the Starfleet symbol in the sand was a bit cheesy. Another scene I didn't really care for was at the end of the second episode, where Burnham was on trial and she was being charged. What is she being charged by? Like the cigarette smoking man from the X-Files? What's the deal with all the shadows? Like the people in the shadows, they look like, those evil judges from the first Superman movie. I kept expecting them to go, guilty, guilty, guilty. I mean, really, it felt like a dream sequence would have. I mean, what the hell was up with that? Now, as for my thoughts on the overall story structure of the show, I loved it. I already heard some complaining about how, the show is called Discovery, and yet we didn't see the Discovery in the first 2 episodes, but I thought that was brilliant. I love how it's keeping things fresh and telling a story in a way that we haven't seen before in Star Trek. I also love how the show is focusing on the first officer instead of the captain. And I thought this episode did a great job at establishing this character. And I love that this is setting up to be a more character-based, serialized show rather than just another show about a starship with the same people sitting on the bridge spouting out techno babble. I said before that that's what Star Trek needed to change. Not, let's have cooler looking aliens and let's have all these weird things or whatever. You need to change the whole format of the show, and that's what the show's doing, and I love it. So this is promising to be a totally different and unique kind of Star Trek show, and I feel that's exactly what the show needs to be, and it's absolutely doing it right. So my rating for the Vulcan Hello and Battle at Binary Stars out of 10 is a 7, very good. This was an entertaining start to a new Trek series that did a lot of things right, such as character development of the main character, with special effects and cinematography that looked absolutely amazing. But while the story was good, it was nothing mind-blowing. And there were a few issues with some scenes coming off a bit jumbled and not so realistic, a bit cardboardish. I heard another reviewer refer to this as the best first episode in any Star Trek series, but I think that's going a bit too far. I'd probably rank it at 3rd out of 5, not counting the original series. I think Deep Space Nine and Voyager had better pilots, but I'd place it above that of Next Generation because that pilot wasn't very good, and most definitely is way better than Enterprise's pilot, which was particularly bad. So a decent start to a Trek series, but not the best. However, I'm really excited about the format of the show, and I think it could get much better from here, so we'll just have to see, but I'll definitely be checking this show out. So that's it for my review of the Vulcan Hello and Battle at Binary Stars. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue cover episodes of Star Trek Discovery, and I also cover videos on all the previous Star Trek series as well, including doing episode reviews as requested by my viewers. So if there's an episode from any of the 5 previous Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review, but just one episode per person, please. I also cover many other shows, such as Game of Thrones, The Expanse, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.